All right, here we go, everyone. Let's rock and roll. Today is the last Tuesday of the month, which means it's Angie's podcast day. And I am super, super excited about this because with me today, I have got John Thomas with Securian on the phone. And we have got some really exciting things to talk about. Now, of course, I know you all realize that whenever I'm talking about long-term care insurance or extended care planning, I think everything's exciting about this. But there is some really cool stuff that John's going to talk to us about, and what we're going to feature on today is long-term care insurance in this changing market, right? What have we seen really amidst all of this COVID and the morbidity and what we saw in the underwriting changes? There's just lots of stuff to talk about, which is a great platform right before Halloween. No tricks, no treats. We're going to just give you a really great podcast talking about things that are impactful to the long-term care planning industry and what we've seen. So, John, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you on my podcast.
Yes, thank you, Angie. I'm thrilled to be with you. I think, as you said, we're both in the long-term care planning industry and market. And so for us, every day is a great day to talk about long-term care planning, right? But yeah. I think in terms of our conversation, for long-term care agents and folks that are in this planning conversation, it really is a tremendous time to talk to consumers about long-term care and long-term care planning. And so I'm thrilled to share that with you.
John, that kind of makes me think. I've had a lot of folks. I feel like I've been in a COVID state of mind, if you will, for almost 2 years now. So I think to myself, I get a lot of questions, and people say to me, Angie, how are sales going? How's that going for you? And I have to tell you,
yes.
It doesn't make me feel good to say this, although I'm glad our industry is finally getting some feet under it for a whole host of reasons, right? Like I've mentioned in one of my other podcasts, because of what the state of Washington has done. But COVID, this pandemic, this worldwide pandemic, has brought a lot of people to come to realize that our morbidity is on the table and you just don't know. So I have seen long-term care sales spike in the last 2 years. And of course that brings happiness to my heart, but sadness that it took this pandemic to do that. But the fact that people are willing to have a conversation about some extended care planning is always a good thing, because John, you have your own story, about how this has impacted you and your family. And I'd love you to share that. And then I think we're going to kind of talk about what we're seeing in some studies that have come out.
Yeah, absolutely, Angie. You're absolutely right. My story. I'm a millennial, believe it or not, and I hate the term millennial.
I do too. It's very negative.
My wife calls us. It is very negative, right? And I'm an old millennial, so I'm right on the cusp of being a Generation X and a millennial. My wife calls us zennials, that we're millennials with that X in front.
There you go.
But I am maybe young for folks that are in this planning conversation talking about long-term care, but it really is, and for me, came from a personal experience. So my grandfather, he's a World War II vet. He was a proud World War II vet, and he was one of the few African American folks that were part of a small unit that fought in the Battle of Normandy. And so he had, this tremendous pride in what he contributed to this country. And he came back to his small town in Ohio after the war and built his own home and established, really an enclave for my family in the small town in Ohio. And then as he aged, of course, we as a family, we didn't talk about illness. We didn't talk about long-term care. And so the family had no plan in place. And as my grandmother aged, my grandfather aged, they needed help, right? And my grandmother ended up passing suddenly, unfortunately, and that left my grandfather alone. And as many of us have seen and experienced, you know, when a widower is left without any help, they go
Mm-hmm.
downhill pretty quick, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he did as well. He went downhill and needed to go into a facility, and it was probably the toughest thing I've ever seen my father go through,
Oh,
is to take his proud father from the home that he built with his own hands, right, and put him in a nursing home.
yeah.
And you know, my grandfather really didn't seem to forgive him. There was a period of time where every time my father would show up at the nursing home, my grandfather would tell him that he was a terrible son,
Oh,
and just a really painful experience for my family. And so that was nearly 15 years ago now, and he passed during this COVID time. And so he was in a nursing home. He passed in the early part of COVID when it was really ravaging through the nursing homes. And so he passed, and then over the last, what has it been now? You know, almost 20 months.
mhm.
I've lost two uncles that were in nursing homes. And so I've experienced really the challenge of just having a traumatic long-term care issue in my family, but then also the additional challenge of experiencing family and nursing homes during COVID, and how challenging that was. And so that's really made me passionate about long-term care planning, and especially now recognize the need to have these conversations with folks. You know, when my uncle passed, we're sitting around at the funeral and families talking afterwards, as you do. You know, in black families, everyone sits around and there's a big meal and a lot of soul food, and we're all talking. And a lot of the older family members were very concerned, and they said, "How do
Yeah.
we, you know, as we age, how do we stay out of a nursing home?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the big question in conversation. And I think that really sets the stage for why it is an important and tremendous time to start having conversations with folks that haven't thought about it or talked about long-term care.
100%. And I think how do we stay out of the nursing home? That is actually the whole crux of why I believe there was this, at least for us here in the Midwest, that's why there was this spike in long-term care sales, because they realized that, look, if I don't have the assets and the income to provide and pay for my own care, then I'm destined to give it all to the facility or end up on Medicaid. And what do I do to prevent that? So long-term care insurance
That's right.
is really anti-nursing home insurance, because it gives you the freedom to choose who, what, where, when you receive your care. And it doesn't mean that you've put everything that you've worked for on the line to be spent down so that you can go on to the state Medicaid program.
That's right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know, at the height of you know, the nursing home challenge with COVID, January of this year, nursing home occupancy was down 15%.
Yeah.
Right? And so of course a lot of folks lost their lives in nursing homes.
Mhm.
But even more than that, the folks that could get out of the nursing home did, right? Families
Right.
that could pull their loved ones out of the nursing home and take care of them at home, they and if they were able to do that, they did that, right? And so you're absolutely right. Long-term care insurance is a way to help folks afford to keep their loved ones out of the nursing home, to bring in caretakers, whether licensed or unlicensed caretakers,
Yep.
to give that additional support. Because as we all know, care begins and ends with family, right? The family, and even for folks
It
that are
does.
in a facility or receiving care, family members heavily involved. They're involved with those decisions, and involved with a lot of the caretaking responsibility.
And I love that, because long-term care insurance is not meant to replace the family. It's actually meant
Mhm.
to help the family provide better care for a longer period of time if necessary. And I know just here locally, I had a lady that she's kind of had some issues with her husband's claim, went on claim very young in his 50s, had a debilitating illness that caused him to be in a nursing home because she couldn't provide,
Mm.
caused some behavioral disorders and stuff, and she couldn't provide for him at home. Well, when COVID came around, she called me and she said, Angie, absolutely not. I'm not leaving him in a nursing home to die there. And what a horrible thought. I mean,
That's right.
they have such a negative connotation to begin with. And now
Yes.
the thought process is, I'm going to the nursing home to die. And so she pulled him out and brought him not to her home, mind you, but to their daughter's home. And they hired through their
Okay.
long-term care policy to have that care provided in the daughter's home. So, I mean, you're right.
Wow.
The flexibility, long-term care insurance is nothing more than an income stream to pay for care when you need it. It's not a guarantee that you're going to a nursing home. Quite frankly, I bought my policy for the exact opposite reason. I figure if I've got the policy in place, I'm not going anywhere. Good Lord's just going to take me. So, I kind of have that's how I rationalize it in my mind. So, John, you sent me over some really awesome studies put out on COVID and some caregiving studies and the aging population. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, because I find it to be incredibly relevant to what we're dealing with right now with, the length and the morbidity of our aging population in America.
Yes, Angie, absolutely. Yeah, and I think in addition to COVID, we're really in this perfect storm environment, right? And as we all know, as we've watched the state of Washington come out with their public plan, right, that local governments and even the federal government is starting to feel the pressure of the baby boomers entering retirement, right? We have the silver tsunami, as they call it, coming our way, and a lot of analysts and folks that study long-term care and caregiving are concerned about caregiver shortages in the coming decade or so. And so there is this storm as we really led into 2020. And one of those studies was through the AARP, and they have this fantastic study, exhaustive study that they do on caregiving. And one of the things that they analyzed was this increase in longevity, but also an increase in chronic illness and the need for care. So just in the 5-year span from 2015 to 2020, what they saw was a 30% increase in folks that needed care for longer than 5 years.
Wow.
And so that's huge, and it's something that we need to be aware of. We always talk about, what the average length of care is, how long will folks really be in care? Will they need it? Well, in 5 years, we saw this 30% increase in folks that had longer durations of care. And a lot of that has to do with chronic illness, right?
Absolutely.
And so they've adjusted what was, a 4-year average length of care to now 4.5 years because of those additional amount of folks that are having longer claims or longer care needs. So you have these, this longer potential care need across the population, and then you add COVID to it, right? The Mayo Clinic is starting to study long COVID, and we're starting to hear that term a bit more, long COVID, but it's really the long-term chronic effects for folks that contract COVID, how it affects our organs, right? That they're looking at, heart damage, that folks have actual lasting damage to their heart tissue, their muscle, or scarring in the lungs, or even some small brain damage that they're looking at analyzing. Is this going to lead to an increase in Alzheimer's or dementia incidences? Over the last 15 years or so, the diagnosis for Alzheimer's has increased 70%. Right, and if we're in a situation where COVID creates additional dementia or Alzheimer diagnoses, that's something that's significant, right?
So
and
John,
so when we have these, yes.
So would you say, based on that study on the COVID effects, which it kind of plays to both avenues, but would you say that these longer claim durations are more physical, more so than cognitive at this time? Is that what is drawing the claim out to be a little bit longer? It's more physical than cognitive?
It is, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the study gets into that a little bit, but shows that folks, that they need breathing treatments for long term. or because of some of the heart damage, higher incidences of blood pressure and medication, and things that we know increases chronic illness that can cause someone to be debilitated or lose mobility down the road. And so I think medicine has advanced to the point where we can keep folks alive, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's a beautiful and a wonderful thing. But at the same time, if you're chronically ill, the likelihood that you're going to need help and assistance down the road increases dramatically.
You know what? We see that brings such an interesting perspective to me because, back in the day, 20, 21, 22 years ago, right? All we sold was lifetime benefits, lifetime benefit,
Mhm.
which was a wonderful thing. You'll never outlive your long-term care policy. However, with that being said, we do see a lot of studies coming through about Alzheimer's and how many people it is afflicting. And I love to tell folks, let's look at your family genetics. And what I find interesting is I stop and I reflect. So when you stand in front of a mirror and you look at yourself, how many, and women are great at this. It's not that men aren't, but women are great at actually playing this forward. I can solely
Sure.
reflect on what my family genetics is, and
Mm.
we don't have the dementia, the Alzheimer's, and that's not to say I do tease people and tell them that I think I probably use my brain a lot more, so I'm probably going to wear it out sooner. But I really think a lot of folks downplay the whole extended care event because they think, oh, well, that's not going to be me. But when you stop
Hmm.
and think about the aging process and you throw COVID, which believe you me, anybody that actually got COVID, whether you got a mild form of it, now if you were asymptomatic, let's not have that conversation. But I have a gentleman in my hometown that's 55, went into ICU, had to be on oxygen. He's come back home now. He's still on oxygen. If you actually take yourself
Mm.
now and look at yourself in the future, can you honestly say to yourself, I'm going to live until I don't? And let that soak in for a minute. How many people live until they don't? And what I mean by that is I had a sister-in-law whose father, they were all there for a family gathering. Sister had come in from out of town and this and that, and they were all over there visiting their dad and had lunch. And they said, Dad, we're going to go home. We're going to run some errands. And he said, that sounds, I mean, he was 84 years old or so. And he said, that's okay. I'm going to go lay down and take a nap. And he went to bed and laid down and take a nap. And they came back a few hours later and he was no longer alive. He lived until he
Wow.
didn't. He never needed extended care. He had all of his faculties. How many of us have that gift when
Yes.
most of us are either going to lose our faculties, or what I see in my family is our mobility, and just how many of us tease about, oh, there's another birthday, there's another ache, there's another birthday,
Mhm.
going to have the knee scoped, going to have the shoulder repaired, going to have the knee replaced. So think about your mobility as you get older. And I find that to be incredibly overwhelming. So you take the natural aging process and then you throw what could be permanent conditions to that from a COVID effect, whether that's, your heart condition, your lungs, which are all critically important, right, to the human body. I
That's
mean,
right.
this is, and like you said, modern day medicine is only going to get better. So we're going to live longer. And if you don't believe that, then why do our mortality tables on life insurance, why are they adjusted every now and again? Because we are living longer. So I find it interesting when people say it's not going to happen to me, because now what they're relying on is their own income, then their assets, and then the charity or Medicaid. And I personally just would rather have a plan in place. And I feel like, look, I got a policy. I'm probably never going to need it. That might not be logical thinking, but I've got a plan and I have a policy.
That's right. Yeah, Angie, I think that's huge. I think the step one is absolutely talk to everyone we know and our clients and consumers about a plan, right? Because you're not going to buy a policy if you don't have a plan. And so understanding what the plan is, who's going to
Mhm.
provide care, where you want to receive care, is also critical. And then you can talk about how a plan or a policy fits into that plan, right? How it can make that plan possible.
Mhm.
Because you're right, with carriers like Securian, who offer an indemnity benefit, a policy, it really is income to provide the type of care that you want,
Mhm.
care at home, care provided by family, right? And it gives you this additional level of flexibility. And I think what's enormous about our current environment, right, is that, post-COVID, or I shouldn't say post, we're still very much in it, right?
Yeah.
But I think the panic of COVID is somewhat subsiding. We're not all still running to the grocery store to buy toilet paper and
Right.
and toiletries and all that. So some of the panic has subsided. And now folks are in more of a serious planning mode.
Mhm.
What does the future look like? What kind of adjustments do we need to make in case something like this happens again? And so, one of the other studies I sent you, Angie, was from LIMRA and Life Happens, the
Mhm.
nonprofit life insurance organization. They put out a great study recently that looked at insurance trends and consumer attitudes. And one of the things they looked at was long-term care interest. And they did this huge study, this exhaustive study that asked folks if they were in the market for long-term care. There was a huge jump in this study this year from the studies they've done in previous years that said that out of the folks that they surveyed, 43% said they were in the market or had a need for long-term care insurance and didn't have it. And the study analyzes that as an active market demand or interest of 110 million consumers.
Oh,
And so it's that kind of information for us as agents should say we need to be talking to everybody, right? 110 million folks are interested in long-term care insurance. And I think, as we think about everything that's going on, folks are interested. They just don't understand what policies look like. They don't understand what a plan really looks like. And so we have to help bridge that gap of,
yes.
yes, you feel like you need something, but what is it? What does it look like? What is your
Mm.
plan, right? And so that's where we really need to have those valuable conversations.
Oh, this makes me so happy because I'm just doing a happy dance here that we act so as agents to and advisors to the consumers out there. Now is your time. Do not be afraid to ask the question, do you have a plan for extended care? If you need extended care, when
That's
you
right.
need extended care, what is your plan? Now, it's fascinating to me that we will all make end of life arrangements. I mean, there are some people that put it to the this is the song I want, these are these are the flowers I like, this is the memorial I
Mhm.
want, dedicate. I mean, we that's why we're buying life insurance. There's obviously other planning needs, but obviously there's life insurance for end of life. And we worry about, you can talk about annuities for income streams, but yet why do we not have a plan in place for living a long life? And that's really what extended
That's
care
right.
planning is. It's just having a plan to live a long life, because not many of us get to live until we don't. And so
Yes.
you just have that plan there. I absolutely love it. And this is not a situational, this is not a limited time frame. But when you've got that study out there that says you have that many Americans, that it's maybe not the top of mind, but at least it's in their mind, it's up to us to drum up that conversation. We have to start the conversation with those consumers, because the minute you wait for them to start the conversation, there's usually a health condition that's bringing that to the table. And so that ends up with us chasing parked cars and declines and getting frustrated at the industry,
Hmm.
when in fact, we just have to be the ones to step forward and start that conversation, and lead them down the path of what's the right plan. If having no insurance is the plan, then that's the plan, but we have to
That's the
educate
plan.
them.
Hmm.
And the great thing is long-term care insurance is not a commodity. You don't get to go out and just punch in a few little statistics about yourself, or your name, date of birth, zip code, and boom. It's not a commodity. And the beauty of this is they've even done surveys that say consumers need advisors. they need people to explain all of this to them. So we're not going to be taken out of the loop of this. This isn't something that they're going to buy online by just putting in a little bit of demographic information. They need you to explain all of the different solutions that are out there. And there are easy ways to do that, because we do have to keep it simple. And John, I don't want to keep us too long, and I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to share about your studies that you have, but I don't want to forget to bring up some really cool stuff that Securian just sent out, that I'm going to be pushing out as well. You know, we know November is Long-Term Care Awareness Month, which unfortunately most of the agents these days that are selling long-term care insurance are also in the middle of Medicare, right? So you've got the Medicare annual election
Yes.
period, you've got the ACA health insurance open enrollments, you know, time frame that's going on, and then you got November, which is Long-Term Care Awareness Month. And not many people, agents, can take the time to dedicate November to a long-term care awareness campaign. So I tell you, and I would encourage anybody that's listening or will listen to this podcast to know that you're not limited to the month of November. And actually, with that being said, I'm really kind of excited to say that we're going to have John back next month on my podcast, because we've got some planning scenarios that we want to go through that will help bring that conversation as we start to roll this out to the year end. But back to the awareness campaigns. If any of you have struggled putting together a coherent sales process, who do I target for, you know, long-term care? What do I say? Is there anything I can put out there? A lot of us are online with our websites and social media. Well, guess what? You don't have to think. Securian has done all of that for you. And I mean, from everything from A to Z, it's long-term care insurance in a box. And you know, as I'm more than happy to share all of that info and go through and help you kind of cherry pick out the clients that work. But it's time. It is the time right now for us to start initiating the conversation, because of all the research that's been done. And to be quite frank, I don't need a report to tell me that consumers are interested in extended care planning. You've seen that, you hear that, they're asking about it. Sales have gone up. Now is the time for us to start that conversation with our consumers, because they need someone to help them navigate through this. And John, I wanted to make sure that if you have anything else you wanted to add before we sign off for this month.
No, thank you, Angie. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now is the time, and I think, you know, we get it to a place where we're having the conversation. We talk about a plan, but then, you know, you introduce insurance, right? And the question often is, well, is insurance really the right solution? And maybe not in every case, but in a lot of cases it is. And so we do have a lot of tools to help you understand in what scenarios for what clients, and why insurance can be a powerful solution. You know, you talked about extended care. I love to position long-term care and extended care as part of retirement planning, right? I call it phase 1 and phase 2 of retirement planning. We love to talk about, you know, the initial phase of retirement when we feel good and we're spending our money and living life. But phase 2 is you slow down, right? And you need some support. And so how do you create income for that second phase of retirement? So we've got great tools, and our product is really positioned well at Securian to help folks understand the value proposition, right? Because we often look at our personal assets or our other retirement assets, our investments, and say, well, we'll just self-fund out of those, right? But a solution and the power of insurance leverage could create a tax equivalent yield that's on par with market investments or even better. And I don't think folks recognize that. And so, yeah, Angie, I know that you've got all of our tools and our information at your hands, and are in a good place to help folks have this conversation with their clients.
Absolutely. John, I can't thank you enough for joining, and I'm really excited that you're going to be with me next month, in the month of November, albeit it's going to be the last Tuesday of the month. We'll be through Long-Term Care Awareness Month. However, we're going to have that conversation about, some planning scenarios and how we can have those conversations with our consumers to help them figure out what is the right way, the planning strategy for them. And I love that, and bringing those solutions to them. So, John, thank you for that. And we will wrap up this month's podcast. And everyone, I hope you enjoyed it. So everyone have a great day.